Good afternoon. Today I've been working up to read a portion of Toni Wolff's lecture to the APC of London on April the 11th, 1934. It's called Some Principles of Dream Interpretation, but it has some very interesting ideas for our current situation in the world, so I thought you should be brought into full knowledge on it. So the task today, it's a test. Who is this referring to in current events? As you remember, Freud has said that the dream is the royal road to the unconscious, and whether Freud's ideas on the unconscious hold true or not, he is certainly right in this valuation of the dream function. Dreams are the one undeniable fact to prove the existence of a physical activity outside the control of our ego consciousness. The most hard-boiled rationalist cannot deny that he is subject to dreaming. However, unpsychologically, he may explain the cause of it. The rationalistic and materialistic concept of dreams, however, is a mere episode in history, a manifestation of the goddess of reason, who presided over the mentality of the 19th century, of which Freud himself is a product. A German poet, Friedrich Huch, published 2 small volumes of his dreams in 1904 and 1914. He characterizes the dream idea as follows. 1. I'm going to publish these dreams with the idea that the expression of the night consciousness can claim our interest, and furthermore, because they often contain the dark germs of our conscious achievements. My dreams should not be valued as literary products, and they are addressed to everyone who sees in the unintentional activity of the psyche an unprejudiced testimony of life." Unquote. This is indeed a most apt description of the dream function, and to illustrate this, I will quote one of these dreams. Quote, "A beautiful girl is lying under a sort of great dark umbrella whose inner side contains all the constellations like the night sky. Rays of light descend from the stars, and wherever they touch her body, their golden reflections are visible." Unquote. The clear symbolism of the dream can be understood without difficulty. It shows how the unconscious psyche, through the mediation of the anima, contains the eternal images and laws of nature. It really is the moral imperative. As you know, every other epoch, without exception, held the dream in deep respect and even in awe. Dreams were considered the utterance of impersonal factors, such as the voice of the gods or fate. The primitives believe firmly in having dreams which concern the welfare of the tribe. These are called big dreams, in contradistinction to small dreams which relate merely to the dreamer's person. Accordingly, if a man has had a big dream, they sit in council over it. The same is recorded of the old Romans, where even certain of the dreams of women were submitted to the Senate. The ancient Greeks, in their sanatoria, which were sanctuaries of Asclepius, made the patient who came there to be cured sleep in the temple on the night following his arrival. The dream had there was then interpreted by the priest, who in this way received the diagnosis as well as the means of therapy. In olden times, a bad dream was looked upon as a bad omen for the doings of the following day. and still is viewed thus by the naive and unprejudiced mind. And quite justly so, for it means that the dreamer is not at one with himself over the plan he is about to carry out. Hello everyone, welcome. You will remember further some of the very interesting dreams in the Old Testament. Joseph's dream, for instance, and the natural consequences which followed it, when he saw himself put above his brothers, the sun, moon, and 11 stars made obeisance to him. Genesis 37, 3-12. And perhaps above all, you will remember the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of kings, who fell a victim to the classic insanity of ancient potentates, that of God Almightiness. Psychologically, this means a tremendous inflation, the ego becoming identified with the self. These monarchs were, of course, led to this condition by the absolute power actually in their hands, but it was a psychologically impossible situation, and so an enantiodromia is inevitable when Nebuchadnezzar is not willing to take Daniel's warnings about the change of attitude. After 12 months, the dreams come true, and the great king becomes insane. He is driven from men, and his heart changed from a man's heart and a beast's heart given to him. The king had dreamt of a tree in the midst of the earth, whose height reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of the earth. And the fruit was much, and animals were sheltered under it, and everybody was fed of it. But then a watcher and holy one came down from heaven and ordered the tree to be hewn down, and the branches cut off, and the fruit scattered, and the beasts and fowls to go away from it, and only the stump to remain. Daniel advises the king to break off his sins by righteousness, and his iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. But instead of taking this advice, Nebuchadnezzar goes on as before, and when he walks in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon, he feels like God after creation, when he saw everything he had made was very good. The king says, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for this honor of my majesty?" At that exact moment, of course, the enantiodromia sets in. A voice from heaven repeats the prophecy of the dream, and it is fulfilled till 7 times passed over, as decreed. Nebuchadnezzar is not released from his downfall until he lifts up his eyes to heaven. That is to say, until he recognizes a power which is greater than his own, and which he cannot control. The necessity for this acceptance had been the unconscious purpose of his insanity, and is therefore also the healing factor, and it needed all this horrible experience for him to come to this submission. But although his case is that of an exceptional personality and situation, it differs only in degree from our own attitude. We may know perfectly well what a dream means to tell us, but there is a wide gap between knowledge and complete realization in body and soul, and it seems almost impossible to change an attitude until one has experienced how utterly impracticable it has become. But I apologize for taking up the role of Daniel. I did not go into the dream to make it the basis of a moral admonition. I chose it for a very different purpose, because the very function of dreams is so wrongfully symbolized in it. You will see what I mean if you abstract from it the historical personality of the dreamer and the danger and imagery typical of the epoch. If you interpret the dream on strictly psychological lines, you will be able to see the exposition of a very fundamental psychological truth and take it as an archetypal image of an age-old human problem. Nebuchadnezzar, then, stands for the ego consciousness, which, like him, is a great king, proud of its achievements and creations, and, as he did, prompted by a previous dream, setting up a great image in its honor. It is a rigid image of gold, with feet partly of iron and partly of clay. It is the image everybody is beholding and fashioning about himself. Young people have to worship the image. They are rather in the situation of Joseph, who is yet to become great, and to that purpose, man, in his first half of life, has to believe in his own unfailing power. To achieve this, the unconscious helps him along with promises and incentives in the form of underlining his ego and belittling people of whom he is too much in awe. But man, in the psychological situation of Nebuchadnezzar, is man at an age where he has achieved whatever he is able to achieve through personal efforts and faith in his own will and intention. He then gets identified with his attainments and values. His ego consciousness becomes the almighty and worshipped image. But its feet are only partly of iron, partly they are of clay. And so the kingdom of the ego shall be partly strong and partly broken. The feet are broken by the agency of the stone, which was cut out of the mountain. Without hands, that is to say, which is not fashioned by man. If man is to live according to the laws of his psychical nature, in the second part of life, he must cease worshiping the all-powerful image of the ego and shift his consciousness from its present center to a new one. In Daniel's words, he ought to be righteous, namely right with the psychological situation which he is moving, and show mercy to the poor, namely those inner factors not identical with the ego, which up to now have been neglected. Before nature, no excuse is effective to avoid this change of attitude. The excuse of having no time, no money, being caught in a responsible position, and complicated relations are mere rationalizations of a profound disinclination of ego consciousness to give up its kingdom and its leadership. And how is one to know when the time for this has come? Exactly as the dream says. There is a watcher and a holy one from heaven who knows and who cries out. He tells by many signs. And one of the paramount ones of them is the dream. The symbol of the watcher is a most excellent one and shows how exact was then the observation of psychical facts by whosoever records the story. It is indeed as if something in ourselves were constantly on guard and watching to see if we are in accordance with our inner laws. The watcher is a regulating factor which seems to be the result of a kind of perception of our psychical totality. Insofar as we are grossly unaware of the total facts of the psyche, the watcher, to heal us of our error, has to use strong language, as in the case of Nebuchadnezzar. The nearer we come to recognizing impersonal psychical factors, the more subtle our psychological sins become, and quite often the dream language accordingly becomes more banal. But in any case, the watcher is of most impartial and unprejudiced character. He does not even moralize. He merely states the facts. He keeps watch on the total psychical continuity and signals if we deviate from it. He does not seem to care much about our welfare and our personal strivings and achievements, but he seems to care a lot about our basic psychical structure and the fundamental law of our total psychical nature, hence the punishment if we err. If we defy these natural facts by too much ignorance or personal willpower, the consequences are many, beginning with small lapses which we merely make fools of ourselves, such as Freud has described in The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, on to nightmares, to nervous symptoms, to a heavy neurotic breakdown, and even a psychosis. The unconscious, that is, our psychical nature, is in itself of indifferent character. If it shows a negative or even destructive aspect, this is the result of a faulty attitude of our conscious. Therefore, the realization of the unconscious is no panacea to set things right. The way of valuing the unconscious facts is always up to our conscious attitude or judgment. The conscious and the unconscious are correlates. They influence each other. Obviously, they are each of a totally different character. The conscious uses the rational language of the epoch we live in. It is the function by which we relate to the external world and through which we establish our personal position in this world. The unconscious, on the other hand, expresses itself in primitive, symbolic, timeless language. It also is purposeful, but its purpose is to set man right with his total psychical structure, with his inner world, to put him en rapport with the eternal image of man, with human nature as it always was and always will be. It is necessary to be quite clear about these two aspects of the psyche in order to get a basis for dream interpretation. You cannot value a dream correctly by either applying a purely intellectual or dogmatic pattern, as Freud and Adler do, nor by making wild guesses without any conscious standpoint at all. The all-important principle of dream analysis is the compensating function of the unconscious in relation to the conscious. For dream interpretation, therefore, one has always to bear in mind two paramount and, in a way, paradoxical truths which correspond to the rational and to the irrational side of the psyche. One is the need for a complete and detailed knowledge of the conscious life of the dreamer. The other is an absolutely unprejudiced and unconditioned attitude toward the unconscious material. If the first is lacking, it is impossible to read the message which the unconscious means to give for the here and now condition of the dreamer, for the actual problem of the moment with which he is confronted. The gap between the conscious and the unconscious will then remain, and the dreamer will either violate the psychical facts by making them fit into his naturally one-sided conscious attitude, or else he will be swamped by the psychical background and loose the hold on his conscious standpoint. He will then become not more conscious, but more unconscious than before, whilst the meaning of the dream interpretation is, of course, to obtain a wider range of consciousness. Now, I wonder who you thought I was reading about, but of course, Dr. Wolff was pointing out that all of us face this problem of ego inflation, and if we have that problem, then we will be hewn down. And so I'm not seeing any comments at the moment. So I thought I would also read for you briefly from 2 chapters of the Bible. So today I'm reading from the New American Bible, Revised Edition, and I'm reading, I'll just read to you the passages that relate to Nebuchadnezzar. And so you see that what Dr. Jung and his colleagues were doing with respect to the biblical text was they were taking dreams as recounted in the Bible and using them for interpretation of these earlier figures. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. And so anyway, okay, so this is chapter 4 of Nebuchadnezzar's madness. Nebuchadnezzar was at home in... Oh, I'm sorry, I'll start it again. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, content and prosperous. I had a terrifying dream as I lay in bed, and the images and my visions frightened me. So I issued a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me to give the interpretation of the dream. When the magicians, enchanters, and Chaldeans and diviners had come in, I related the dream before them, but none of them could tell me its meaning. Finally, there came before me Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. I repeated the dream to him. Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that a spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. This is the dream that I saw. Tell me its meaning. Quote, these were the visions I saw while in bed. I saw a tree of great height at the center of the earth. It was large and strong, with its top touching the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, providing food for all. Under it, the wild beasts found shade. In its branches, the birds of the air nested. All flesh ate of it. In the visions I saw while in bed, a holy watcher came down from heaven and cried aloud in these words, quote, cut down the tree and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from beneath it, and the birds from its branches, but leave its stump in the earth. Bound with iron and bronze, let him be fed with the grass of the field, and bathed with the dew of heaven. Let his lot be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a human one. Let the mind of a beast be given him, till 7 years pass over him. In decree of the watchers is this proclamation, by order of the holy ones, this sentence, that all who live may know that the Most High is sovereign over human kingship, giving it in whom he with the setting is over the lowliest of mortals. Unquote. This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now, Belteshazzar, tell me its meaning. None of the wise men in my kingdom can tell me the meaning, but you can, because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was appalled for a time, dismayed by his thoughts. Belteshazzar, the king said to him, do not let the dream or meaning dismay you. My lord Belteshazzar Belteshazzar replied, "May this dream be for your enemies, and its meaning for your foes. The tree that you saw, large and strong, its top touching the heavens, that could be seen by the whole earth, its leaves beautiful, its fruit abundant, providing food for all, under which the wild beasts lived, and in those branches the birds of the air dwell. You are that tree. You are that tree, O king, large and strong. Your majesty has become so great as to touch the heavens, and your rule reaches the ends of the earth. As for the king's vision of a holy watcher, who came down from the heaven and proclaimed, 'Cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump in the earth. Bound with iron and bronze, let him be fed with the grass of the field, and bathed with the dew of heaven. Let his lot be with the wild beasts till 7 years pass over him.' Here is its meaning, O king. Here is the sentence that the Most High has passed upon my lord king. You shall be cast out from human society, and dwell with wild beasts. You shall be given grass to eat like the ox, and be bathed with the dew of heaven. 7 years shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High is sovereign over human kingship, and gives it to whom he will. The command that the stump of the tree is to be left means that your kingdom shall be preserved for you once you have learned that heaven is sovereign. Therefore, O king, may my advice be acceptable to you. Atone for your sins by good deeds, and for your misdeeds by kindness to the poor. Then your contentment will be long-lasting." All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as he was walking on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon, the king said, "Babylon the Great, was it not I, with my great strength, who built it as a royal residence for my splendor and my majesty?" While these words were still on the king's lips, a voice from heaven spoke. "It has been decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar, that your kingship is taken from you. You shall be cast out from human society, and shall dwell with wild beasts. You shall be given grass to eat like an ox, and 7 years shall pass over you, until you learn that the Most High is sovereign over human kingship, and gives it to whom he will." At once this was fulfilled. Nebuchadnezzar was cast out from human society. He ate grass like an ox, and his body was bathed with the dew of the heavens, until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle, and his nails like the claws of a bird. When this period was over, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes to heaven. My reason was restored to me, and I blessed the Most High. I praised and glorified the one who lives forever, whose dominions is an everlasting dominion, and whose kingdom endures through all generations. All who live on the earth are counted as nothing. He does as he wills with the powers of heaven and with those who live on the earth. There is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and my splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles sought me out. I was restored to my kingdom and became much greater than before. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, all of whose works are right and ways just, and who is able to humble those who walk in pride. Okay, so from a psychological point of view, we're talking about the power of the God image, the self, to strike us down when we get too big for our britches. And so that's what Nebuchadnezzar experienced. You're welcome to put in comments or questions, but I will continue on to read because I want to read the chapter about the writing on the wall. I'm reading from Daniel chapter 5. The writing on the wall. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles, with whom he drank. Under the influence of the wine, he ordered the gold and silver vessels, which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so to be brought in so that the king, his nobles, his consorts, and his concubines might drink from them. When the gold vessels taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, had been brought in, and while the king, his nobles, his consorts, and his concubines were drinking wine from them, they praised their gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. Suddenly, opposite the lampstand, the fingers of a human hand appeared, writing on the plaster of the wall in the king's palace. When the king saw the hand that wrote, his face became pale. His thoughts terrified him. His hip joints shook, and his knees knocked. The king shouted for the enchanters, Chaldeans, and diviners to be brought in. Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means, he said to the wise men of Babylon, shall be clothed in purple, wear a chain of gold around his neck, and be third in governing the kingdom. But though all the king's wise men came in, none of them could either read the writing or tell the king what it meant. Then King Belshazzar was greatly terrified. His face became pale, and his nobles were thrown into confusion. When the queen heard of the discussion between the king and his nobles, she entered the banquet hall and said, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts terrify you and your face become so pale. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. During the lifetime of your father, he showed brilliant insight and godlike wisdom. King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and diviners. Because this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, was shown an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and insight in interpreting dreams, explaining riddles, and solving problems, let him now be summoned to tell you what this means." Then Daniel was brought into the presence of the king. The king asked him, "Are you the Daniel, one of the Jewish exiles, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, that you have shown brilliant insight and extraordinary wisdom." The wise men and enchanters were brought in to me to read this writing and tell me its meaning, but they could not say what the words meant. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you are able to read the writing and tell me what it means, you shall be clothed in purple, wear a chain of gold around your neck, and be third in governing the kingdom. Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts, or give your presents to someone else, but the writing I will read for the king and tell what it means. The Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar kingship, greatness, splendor, and majesty. Because he made him so great, the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Whomever he willed, he would kill or let live. Whomever he willed, he would exalt or humble. But when his heart became proud and his spirit hardened by insolence, he was put down from his royal throne and deprived of his glory. He was cast out from human society, and his heart was made like that of a beast. He lived with wild asses and ate grass like an ox. His body was bathed with the dew of heaven, until he learned that the Most High God is sovereign over human kingship, and sets over it whom he will. You, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled yourself, though you know all this. You have rebelled against the Lord of heaven. You had the vessels of this temple brought before you, so that you and your nobles, your consorts, and your concubines might drink wine from them, and you praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, that neither see nor hear nor have intelligence. But the God in whose hand is your very breath and the whole course of your life you did not glorify. By him was the hand sent and the writing set down. This is the writing that was inscribed: Mene, Tekel, and Peres. These words mean, Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then by order of Belshazzar, they clothed Daniel in purple with a chain of gold around his neck and proclaimed him third in governing the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. Okay, that cheery story. We're looking at it from an archetypal point of view. Hello, greetings to Zen Christ. We're looking at this story from an archetypal point of view, and the Most High God is the self. In Jungian psychology terms, we're talking about the self or the God image. And when we or anyone else gets too big for our britches, then there is a psychological function in us that hews us down or writes on the wall of the temple that you're not worthy. I'll just read the footnote here. And this is related to Daniel 5:25-28. Mene, Tekel, and Peres, these seem to be the Aramaic names of weights and monetary values. The mina, the shekel, the 60th part of the mina, and the parsu, a half mina. Daniel interprets these three terms by a play on words. Mene connected with the verb meaning to number, Tekel with the verb meaning to weigh, and Peres with the verb meaning to divide. There is also a play on the last term with the word for Persians. Okay, so that's where the words came from that were written on the wall, the handwriting on the wall that the king could not read. In any case, that is my reading for today, and I will be back online at 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time tonight for our weekly meeting of the Carl Jung Depth Psychology Reading Group. I hope to see you all then, but I'm going to log off now to keep my voice. Now, this particular lecture that I read at the beginning of Toni Wolff goes on for quite a bit longer, and so I'm going to look at its later parts and decide whether I should read more of it. But for now, I thought, given current events and perhaps your own affairs, it would be quite useful to hear it. So this was the unconscious self or God image in the dream, hewing down the ego in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and that's why there's a stump on the thumbnail for this reading. And this is the psyche's way of cutting down an ego that's gotten too big for itself. And so, let me see, there's one comment. Okay, so Tom, thank you very much, and Zen Christ, thank you for commenting here, and I'm going to terminate for now, but I'll be back at 8 p.m. Eastern Time to continue on with psychology and alchemy and any other issues that you may want to talk about relating to Jungian psychology. Thank you for being with me today. Bye.